He rode into town to arrest her, but didn't know he would fall in love when he looked into her eyes. The weight of the law, heavy and unyielding, lay in Marshal Ben Carter's saddlebag. It took the form of a folded warrant, the paper already creased and softened from his restless handling. The name inscribed upon it was Nita, a woman belonging to the small, displaced tribe that clung to existence near the struggling settlement of Stone Creek. Cattle theft was the charge, a crime serious enough to hang a man, or a woman, in these harsh territories. But it wasn't the stark script of the warrant, nor the grim reputation of frontier justice, that truly troubled Ben Carter as his horse plodded through the vast, indifferent landscape. It was a peculiar disquiet in his soul, a persistent hum of unease he'd learned over many solitary years to heed. He'd faced down hardened outlaws, stared into the eyes of killers, and felt less turmoil than this single piece of paper now evoked. Sparse reports had painted a picture of a cunning thief, a shadowy figure adept at evading notice. Yet, contradictory whispers on the trail spoke of her rare grace, a spirit as untamed and vital as the prairie wind itself. He was Marshal Ben Carter, a man bound by oath and duty, riding to deliver the law's cold, impartial judgment. But the wind, sighing through the tall grasses, seemed to carry a different message, a warning that the woman he was sent to chain might instead irrevocably capture his very heart. Ben Carter. The name itself carried a certain gravity across the scattered towns and lonely ranches of the frontier. He was known as a lawman of unyielding resolve, yet one who carried a quiet fairness within him, a rare commodity in a land often ruled by the quickest draw or the heaviest purse. His life was a solitary path, etched by dusty trails, the crackle of lonely campfires, and the stark, often brutal choices demanded by frontier justice. A profound weariness clung to him, an invisible cloak woven from too many encounters with human greed, senseless cruelty, and the endless, heartbreaking cycle of violence. He'd seen men hang for less, and seen true villains walk free, their pockets lined with gold. He yearned for something more than the cold, fleeting satisfaction of a closed case, a notch on his belt. He yearned for a justice that felt true, not just enacted. Stone Creek, his current destination, was little more than a raw, fledgling settlement, a handful of buildings fighting for their precarious existence against the vast, unforgiving canvas of the plains. It was a place where hope and desperation lived side by side, their ragged edges constantly rubbing. Miles from the nervous, inward-looking energy of Stone Creek, nestled in a shallow, sheltered cove, carved by an ancient, meandering stream, Nita lived her life. It was a life lived in deep, intrinsic harmony with the rhythms of the earth, a cadence lost on most who now populated the territory. Her people, the last remnants of a tribe uprooted and driven from their ancestral lands further east by the relentless tide of settlement, had found a fragile, temporary sanctuary here. She was their healer, her hands possessing an intuitive knowledge of herbs and poultices, her touch capable of soothing fevers and mending broken bones. She was their quiet strength, her counsel sought by elders and young alike, her wisdom a lifeline in a rapidly changing, increasingly hostile world. A profound, almost ancestral sorrow sometimes shadowed her dark, intelligent eyes, for she saw the encroachment of the new world with a painful clarity, the shrinking horizons for her tribe, the dwindling game, the sacred places desecrated or fenced off. Still, her spirit remained unbroken, a resilient beacon of dignity and quiet defiance against the dying of her people's light. The Singing Falls, a sacred cascade of water hidden deeper in their territory, was the very heart of their existence, and she was its fiercest, quietest protector. Marshal Ben Carter rode down Stone Creek's lone, dusty main street as the sun began its slow, dramatic descent. Bleeding hues of orange, purple, and blood red across the vast western sky. Buildings of raw, unpainted timber leaned together, some precariously, as if for mutual support against the relentless prairie winds. Their windows, mostly small and grimy, seemed like vacant eyes, watching his solitary approach with a mixture of apathy and suspicion. The usual sounds of a frontier town, the tinny piano from a saloon, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices, seemed muted, almost furtive. Silence, heavy and watchful, followed him as he dismounted stiffly before the clapboard structure that served inadequately as both jail and marshal's office. His inquiries about Nita were met with a chilling tapestry of tight-lipped fear, averted gazes, and outright venomous hostility. The name Marcus Blackwood, the powerful, unseen owner of the sprawling Blackwood ranch that bordered the tribe's meager lands, dominated their hushed, nervous tones. It was Blackwood's prime cattle Nita was accused of stealing. Blackwood, whose influence, it was whispered, seemed to own Stone Creek, body, soul, and perhaps even its future. Ben found Nita not within the confines of the settlement, nor near her people's modest encampment, but alone, on a narrow, barely discernible path that wound towards the whispering cottonwoods along the creek bed. She carried a basket woven from river reeds, its contents a fragrant collection of late-season herbs and roots. The fading sunlight, filtered through the leaves, caught the raven sheen of her long, unbound hair and sculpted the proud, elegant line of her jaw. When she turned, sensing his approach, her gaze met his, direct, unwavering, and utterly unafraid. In their dark, clear depths, he saw not the cunning of a thief, nor the defiance of an outlaw, but a profound, sorrowful wisdom, an ancient understanding of suffering that seemed far older than her years. The carefully rehearsed words of arrest, words he had spoken countless times before with detached professionalism, felt alien and clumsy on his tongue. "Nita," he began, his voice emerging huskier, rougher than he intended, the sound grating in the stillness of the evening. "I am Marshal Ben Carter. I have a warrant for your arrest." He held the paper out, a flimsy shield against the intensity of her gaze. "The charge is cattle theft from the Blackwood Ranch." A flicker of deep pain, so fleeting he almost missed it, crossed her finely cut features, only to be instantly masked by a stoic, almost regal calm. She did not protest, did not plead for mercy, or deny the charge. She simply inclined her head, a gesture of solemn acceptance that pierced Ben's carefully constructed composure more sharply, more deeply than any spoken defiance could have. As he looked into her eyes, truly looked, he felt an unexpected jolt, a profound recognition that went deeper than words, a sudden, startling awareness of the woman standing before him, not just the accused, but a spirit of immense strength and sorrow. The warrant in his hand suddenly felt like an instrument of profound, unforgivable injustice. This moment, he sensed with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, was a precipice, a point of no return. The journey to Stone Creek's crude, oppressive jail was mercifully short in distance. But for Ben, it was an eternity fraught with a growing, suffocating inner turmoil. Nita walked beside him, her head held high, her quiet dignity a stark, unspoken reproach to the furtive, judgmental glances of the few townsfolk they passed. The silent, palpable sorrow in the eyes of her people, who watched from the shadowed edge of town as she was led away, was a heavy, suffocating blanket of reproach. Marcus Blackwood awaited them at the jailhouse door, a mountain of a man whose expensive, tailored attire and smug, overbearing confidence seemed utterly out of place in the struggling, impoverished town. His eyes, small and cold like chips of winter ice, appraised Nita with a predatory, possessive gleam that made Ben's hackles rise. "Well done, Marshal Carter," Blackwood boomed, his voice dripping with a false, oily congeniality that grated on Ben's nerves. "Prompt service. Stone Creek certainly appreciates a lawman who knows his business and doesn't dally. He gestured towards the barred door of the single cell. Put the thief where she belongs. Ben's hand instinctively tightened near the butt of his Colt. She'll be held according to the law, Blackwood, he stated. His tone clipped and devoid of warmth, as he ushered Nita into the small, grim cell. The barred door clanged shut, with a sound of dreadful finality. As he turned the key in the rusty lock, Nita met his gaze. A silent, searching question in her eyes. He found, to his own surprise, that he couldn't look away, couldn't break the profound connection that seemed to arc between them. In the days that followed, Ben found himself increasingly, deeply troubled. The official story, detailed with such sparse certainty in the warrant, and amplified by Blackwood's confident public pronouncements, felt thin, brittle, like sun-baked earth ready to crack under pressure. He observed Blackwood's men, Hank, the foreman, in particular. Their arrogance was galling, the casual cruelty in their eyes when they spoke of Nita or any of her people was chilling. He saw the way Blackwood's shadow, long and dark, chilled the very heart of Stone Creek, stifling dissent, breeding fear. He began to speak with Nita, his visits initially brief, strictly professional, cloaked in the guise of official duty. But her quiet intelligence, her profound, almost spiritual connection to the land she described, with such gentle reverence, the subtle, almost imperceptible inconsistencies she pointed out in the accusations against her, began to systematically erode his certainty. He saw her tending a wilting desert wildflower he'd absently plucked, and then, feeling foolish, had placed in her cell. Her touch was gentle, her low murmurings to it, almost a prayer. This was no common thief, no hardened criminal. Doubt, once a small seed, became a constant, nagging companion, growing with each passing hour. His quiet, discreet inquiries around town, conducted under the guise of routine investigation, confirmed his growing unease. Small, overlooked details didn't add up. The timing of the alleged theft, the curious lack of any real substantive evidence beyond the sworn, yet somehow hollow-sounding word of Blackwood's foreman, Hank, a man known more for his quick, violent temper and slavish devotion to his boss than for his honesty. Ben started to feel he wasn't just investigating a simple case of cattle rustling, but rather peeling back the layers of a carefully constructed, deeply rotten conspiracy. His protective instinct towards Nita, the woman, not just the prisoner, grew stronger, a feeling more profound, more personal than simple duty. He found himself anticipating their brief conversations, looking for the quiet strength in her eyes. Blackwood, a man unaccustomed to his will being questioned, sensed Ben's meticulous nature and perhaps a subtle shift in his demeanor. His impatience began to fester. He confronted Ben in the marshal's cramped office, his large frame seeming to suck all the air from the small room. "Carter," he growled, his face reddening with ill-suppressed anger. "This town wants swift justice, not endless, pointless questions. That woman is guilty as sin. My men saw her with their own eyes. What more proof do you possibly need? Proof that stands up to scrutiny." "Blackwood," Ben replied, his voice dangerously level, his gaze unwavering. "The kind of proof that ensures an innocent doesn't hang. Not just your word, or the word of men who depend on you for their bread." The tension between them was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. Later that same evening, Hank, Blackwood's foreman, and a few other riders from the Blackwood Ranch, emboldened by cheap whiskey, tried to intimidate Nita through the single barred window of her cell. Their words were vile, their threats crude and menacing. Ben emerged from the shadows of his office. His presence alone, the cold promise in his eyes, enough to make them back down and slink away, muttering curses. But not before Nita met their spitting hatred with an unshakable, almost serene calm that further astonished and impressed him. "The spirits of this land see all that is done in darkness," she told them, her voice low but resonant, carrying an undeniable authority. "They do not forget." The next blow fell with calculated swiftness. Word came, carried by a distraught youth from Nita's tribe, that their winter stores, dried meats, preserved berries, vital grains, all painstakingly gathered and prepared, had been ransacked, pillaged, and deliberately despoiled. Despair, stark and chilling, settled over her people. Nita received the devastating news with a quiet, profound grief that tore at Ben's already troubled conscience. He saw the cold, almost reptilian calculation in Blackwood's eyes when the rancher offered mock sympathy to the town council. It was sickeningly clear Blackwood was tightening the noose, trying to break Nita's spirit and starve her people into submission. That night, under the cold, indifferent light of a partial moon, Ben went to Nita's cell. The moonlight cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating her face, etched with sorrow but also an unyielding, almost luminous strength. "This is about more than a few head of cattle, isn't it, Nita?" he asked, the question almost a statement, his voice softer now. Stripped of officialdom, her gaze met his, deep and searching, as if weighing his soul. "He wants the Singing Falls," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of generations. "It is the last sacred spring of my ancestors, the only source of clean, sweet water for many miles that his fences do not yet claim. It is the lifeblood of my people, the heart of our ceremonies. If he can shame me, break my spirit, he believes my people will be forced to surrender it to him for a pittance, or scatter to the four winds like dry leaves." Her words, spoken with such quiet, heartbreaking conviction, confirmed his darkest, most damning suspicions. The theft, the accusations, the deliberate destruction of their winter supplies. It was all a brutal, meticulously calculated scheme to dispossess Nita's people, to erase them from the land. A cold, righteous anger, clear and purposeful, solidified in Ben's heart. He looked at Nita, at the quiet, indomitable courage that shone from her even in this dark hour, and knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not, would not, let this stand. The law he served, the badge he wore, had to mean more than this. His feelings for her, a complex tapestry of admiration, respect, and a fierce, burgeoning protectiveness, now burned brightly, a guiding light in the encroaching darkness. He would unearth the truth, whatever the personal or professional cost. Ben Carter began his own quiet, methodical war against the edifice of lies Blackwood had constructed. He rode out again to the supposed scene of the crime, that desolate stretch of prairie marking the contested boundary line between Blackwood's vast, ever-expanding ranch and the meager, shrinking lands allotted to Nita's tribe. This time, he went not as an officer executing a warrant, but as a tracker, a reader of signs, his years of experience on the lonely trails honing his senses. His experienced eyes scanned the ground, painstakingly, reading the subtle, often overlooked story the earth itself held. The cattle tracks were there, clear enough, but they were too orderly, too deliberate. They had been pushed, skillfully driven, not rustled in haste by a desperate thief. And Nita's horse's tracks, they appeared much later in the narrative of the earth, and they were moving against the main herd, as if she had been frantically trying to turn them back, to drive them away from her people's sacred ground, not towards it. His investigation, now fueled by a burning sense of purpose, led him to a neighboring, much smaller ranch, run by a nervous, perpetually worried man named Peterson. It was Peterson's youngest ranch hand, a lad named Billy, barely more than a boy, whose eyes held the flicker of a hidden truth and a consuming fear. Ben found Billy mending a fence line far from the main ranch house, his movements jerky and inefficient, with gentle, patient persistence, speaking not as a stern marshal, but as one man to another, appealing to the boy's conscience. Ben drew the story from him, piece by painful piece. I saw it, Marshal, Billy finally confessed, the words tumbling out in a choked, trembling rush. His young face pale and slick with sweat despite the cool breeze. The night they said she stole him. I was out late, looking for a stray calf near the boundary line. It was dark, but the moon was near full, bright enough to see by if you knew where to look. He took a ragged breath. It was Mr. Blackwood's foreman, Marshal. It was Hank, and another rider from the Blackwood ranch with him. I saw them plain as day. They drove them prime steers right onto the tribe's land, deliberate as you please. Then Hank, he raised his pistol and fired it in the air a couple of times, loud and echoing, like he was chasing off rustlers. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs, a drumbeat of vindication and cold fury. And Nita? He pressed, his voice gentle, coaxing. What did you see of Nita? She came later, Marshal. Billy continued, his voice gaining a sliver of strength as the truth, so long suppressed, finally found voice. She must have heard the commotion, the shots. She wasn't stealing nothing, Marshal. I swear it on my mother's grave. She was trying to push them steers back towards Blackwood's own property, away from her people's sacred ground. That's when Hank and his men, they caught her. It was all a setup, Marshal. A dirty, rotten setup. The truth, stark, brutal, and ugly, lay bare before him. Nita was innocent, framed with cold-blooded precision by Blackwood's insatiable greed. She had been protecting her land, her people's heritage, not plundering from another's. The quiet rage that filled Ben was glacial, focused. He now had the weapon he needed, the undeniable truth to dismantle Blackwood's corrupt empire of lies. And he knew, with an absolute, life-altering certainty, that his own life was now inextricably intertwined with Nita's in a way he hadn't anticipated, hadn't sought, but now, fully, fiercely, embraced. The Rusty Spur Saloon was crowded, its air thick with stale tobacco smoke, the smell of cheap whiskey, and the low, rumbling murmur of male conversations. When Marshal Ben Carter strode in, the dust of his profound revelation still seemed to cling to him, an aura of grim purpose radiating from him like heat from a desert rock. Marcus Blackwood was at his usual prominent table, holding court with several of his riders from the Blackwood ranch, including his swaggering foreman, Hank. The rancher was laughing, a booming, arrogant sound that grated on Ben's already frayed nerves. The saloon, a place usually resistant to sudden silences, fell eerily quiet. As Ben approached their table, his spurs a soft, rhythmic, almost menacing chime on the rough-hewn wooden floor. Every eye in the room was on him. Blackwood. Ben's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it sliced through the unnatural stillness like a honed blade. We need to talk. About those cattle Nita is accused of stealing. And more importantly, about the truth. Then mine. No mine. No mine. No mine. Blackwood's jovial smile faltered, quickly replaced by a contemptuous sneer. Truth? I thought we were past questions and on to justice, Marshal. The woman's a common thief. Case closed far as I'm concerned. Far as this town is concerned. Not quite, Ben said, his gaze unwavering, as hard as tempered steel. He then, systematically, clearly, his voice never rising but carrying to every corner of the hushed room, laid out what he had learned. He spoke of the telltale tracks, of the deliberate way the cattle had been driven onto tribal land, and then he played his ace, his eyes locking with Blackwood's. There was a witness, Blackwood. Someone who saw your man, Hank, right there, driving those cattle himself, under your orders, I've no doubt. As if summoned by Ben's words, The saloon doors creaked open, and young Billy Peterson stepped hesitantly inside, his face pale, but unexpectedly resolute. He'd insisted on coming, on speaking the truth publicly, despite the palpable fear that made him tremble. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at Hank. I saw him," Billy said, his voice shaky but surprisingly clear in the charged silence. "I saw Hank. He's the one who pushed them cows onto the Indian land. And I saw Nita. She wasn't stealing anything. She was trying to drive them back." Hank, his face contorting into a mask of pure animalistic rage, leaped to his feet. "Why, you little lying whelp!" he snarled, his hand darting with lethal speed for the pistol holstered at his hip. But Ben was a whisper of motion, a blur of contained, deadly grace. His own Colt Peacemaker seemed to materialize in his hand, not aimed at Hank's chest, but with pinpoint accuracy at his gun hand. "I wouldn't try it, Hank," Ben warned, his voice deadly calm, a quiet promise of swift retribution. Hank froze, his hand hovering inches from his weapon, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and sudden, stark fear. The other riders from the Blackwood ranch tensed, hands inching towards their own guns. But Ben's steely gaze swept over them, cold and uncompromising, daring them to make a move. They hesitated, then visibly deflated. Blackwood was on his feet now, his face a mask of disbelief turning into apoplectic fury. "This is an outrage. Preposterous. You'll take the perjured word of this sniveling, half-wit farm boy over the sworn testimony of my trusted foreman." "I'll take the truth wherever I find it, Blackwood," Ben retorted, his voice ringing with a conviction that resonated through the room. "And the truth is, Nita is innocent. You framed her. You wanted her silenced, her people driven from their land, all so you could seize control of the Singing Falls." The townsfolk, who had been listening with rapt, almost breathless attention, began to murmur amongst themselves, the sound growing from a whisper to an angry buzz. Doubt flickered in their eyes, then shame, then a dawning, collective anger, as they realized the extent to which they'd been manipulated, their own fears and prejudices expertly played by the man who had styled himself their benefactor. They had seen Blackwood's greed before, felt the heavy, suffocating weight of his influence. Now, they saw its ugliest, most craven manifestation. "Deputy," Ben commanded the stunned, wide-eyed young man who had been watching from the doorway. "Bring Nita here. Now." When Nita was brought into the saloon, she entered not as a prisoner, cowed and defeated, but as an accuser, her quiet dignity and unshakable composure filling the suddenly solemn room. She looked at Marcus Blackwood, not with hatred or malice, but with a profound, sorrowful understanding of his corrupted, grasping soul. The sight of her, undeniably innocent and serenely resolute, standing beside the now exposed, sputtering, and rapidly shrinking figure of Blackwood, was a powerful, irrefutable indictment. The tide of public opinion in Stone Creek, so long dammed by Blackwood's power, had turned with the sudden, unstoppable force of a flash flood. The crowd's condemnation was palpable, a heavy, suffocating judgment. Marcus Blackwood's carefully constructed empire of fear and lies in Stone Creek crumbled into dust before their very eyes. Justice, raw, potent, and undeniable, had finally, decisively, arrived. Marcus Blackwood, his face ashen, his customary arrogance shattered into 1,000 pieces, offered no further resistance as Marshal Ben Carter formally arrested him for conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, malicious destruction of property, and incitement to violence. Hank, his bluster long gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated terror, was also taken into custody, his desperate attempt to draw on Ben sealing his fate with grim finality. The other riders from the Blackwood ranch, seeing their leader and their enforcer fall, quietly, nervously, dispersed into the shocked silence, their swagger and menace evaporating like morning mist under a harsh sun. Nita was officially, publicly, cleared of all charges. A collective wave of profound relief, mingled with a deep, uncomfortable shame for their swift, prejudiced judgment, washed over the townsfolk of Stone Creek. Some, their faces etched with contrition, approached her, offering hesitant, heartfelt apologies, extending tentative gestures of goodwill and aid. The path to true, lasting reconciliation between the settlement and Nita's people would undoubtedly be long and arduous, but a fragile seed of understanding, of shared humanity, had been planted in the fertile ground of exposed truth. The Singing Falls, her people's sacred lifeblood, would remain under their stewardship and protection, its clear waters flowing free, a symbol of their enduring resilience and the triumph of justice. Marshal Ben Carter found, to his own quiet surprise, that he could not simply saddle his horse and ride away from Stone Creek, back to the lonely trails and the endless cycle of pursuit and capture that had defined his existence for so long. The warrant that had brought him to this dusty, unremarkable town, the legal instrument of Nita's intended doom, was now a meaningless, forgotten piece of paper. His duty, the rigid code he had lived by, had led him to an unexpected, life-altering crossroads, and his heart, a part of him he had long thought dormant, had chosen a new, uncharted path. He had looked into Nita's eyes and seen not an outlaw, not a savage, but a profound reflection of a deeper, more resonant law, a fundamental truth of the spirit that transcended any man-made statute. In the days and weeks that followed, a new, unspoken understanding grew between them, as natural and inevitable as the turning of the seasons. He saw her not just as a woman he had, by a twist of fate and a stubborn adherence to his own conscience, saved from a terrible injustice, but as a woman who had, in turn, saved him from the encroaching, soul-deadening cynicism of his past, from the crushing loneliness of his solitary existence. He found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet, unwavering strength, her profound wisdom, the way her rare, genuine smile could illuminate the shadowed, weary corners of his soul. He had ridden into Stone Creek to arrest her, a lawman bound by duty. He had found himself, instead, captive to a love more powerful, more liberating than any law he had ever known. One evening, as the sun performed its magnificent daily ritual of farewell over the vast, silent plains, painting the sky in hues of fire and amethyst that Nita cherished, Ben stood with her near the sacred whispering waters of the Singing Falls. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The future stretched before them, uncertain and filled with the inherent challenges of frontier life, but no longer solitary. "My path has been a long and often lonely one, Nita," he said, his voice filled with an emotion he no longer tried, nor wished, to hide. He turned to face her, taking her hands gently in his own. "It seems against all odds, against all reason, it has led me here, to you." Nita turned to him, her dark, luminous eyes reflecting the soft light of the evening sky and the deeper light of her own spirit. A soft, almost shy smile touched her lips, a smile that reached deep into his heart. "Perhaps, Ben Carter," she said, her voice as gentle and soothing as the murmur of the falls beside them. "Our paths were always destined to cross, two solitary rivers flowing towards a shared horizon, so that we might finally walk a new one, together." He reached for her then, his arms enfolding her, drawing her close. It felt right. It felt like coming home, a home he hadn't known he was searching for until he found it in her eyes, in her strength, in her love. He had ridden into town to arrest her, a marshal bound by the iron chains of the law. He would stay, now and forever, bound by the infinitely stronger, infinitely sweeter chains of love. His future was here, in Stone Creek, beside this remarkable woman, under the vast, watchful sky of the West. They would now face as one.